Testing, yes, we're working. Just as we start this afternoon, if anybody is a curling fan, our Saskatchewan junior curlers are in a final against Manitoba, tied in the 7th end. And as far as an update on NFL football, I know nothing about that, other than there's fog, I'm told, in Phoenix today. I'd like to welcome everybody to this session. My name is Malcolm Eaton. I'm the Mayor of Humboldt and a member of the SUMA board, and I'd like to welcome everybody. I'd just like to begin reviewing a few safety procedures and fire exits. In the event of an emergency, this building is equipped with alarms that sound and strobe lights that will flash. The building alarm system has 2 stages. The first stage is a warning, intermittent ringing and strobe lights flashing. A second stage is a call for evacuation. It's a continuous ring with strobes, and the TCU staff will help with announcements and guidance if it was necessary to evacuate the building. Please make your way calmly to the west exit onto 22nd Street. There's a muster point under the flagpoles, which is just directly outside. Please use the stairwells, which are marked with exit signs. Do not use the elevator. If you are mobility impaired, you will be assisted by either the staff or other members of the group, and please remain outside the building until we're advised that the building has been cleared. There are 3 exits from Centennial Hall. Certainly through the back doors here and up the stairwell through the east fire doors, or there is a south exit via the kitchen area, which is behind us. So just to make sure, in the spirit of Mission Zero and Safe Saskatchewan, that we make sure that those kind of safety procedures are known to everybody. There are also men's washroom out and to the right, ladies' washrooms out and to the left. We would like you to know that the session is being audio recorded, and so if you're asking questions, we ask you to please use the microphone and speak clearly into the microphone. This is very important as the sessions are made available to our membership, and certainly the questions are an important part of any presentation. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Mike Dundas. Mike has been contracted by SUMA to help design and implement our municipal procurement program. He's bringing 14 years of public and private procurement experience. He holds an associate degree in business administration, Bachelor of Science degree majoring in finance, and holds the supply chain management professional designation. And we're very pleased to have Mike working with us and helping to develop this program. And certainly for those of us who attended the assessment and taxation session this morning, that's a very important part of our work, but also spending those tax dollars in the best way possible is another important part of our job. So important topic and important program that SUMA is trying to improve and develop further. So please join me in welcoming Mike Dundas to the presentation. Mike.
Great, thanks Malcolm. Everybody can hear me all right, I take it? If not, give me a thumbs up, or if I'm too loud and annoying, thumbs down, and go from there. So I want to start off by thanking you for attending today's session, especially one on procurement. It's something that's very important to me and has been throughout my own career, and certainly I think the benefits, not only to SUMA, but I think more importantly to the members, are something that will be clear that we can put through. So I want to encourage you, if you do have questions, feel free at any time, put your hand up and I'll stop, and you can hit the microphone and we can go from there. And but there'll be a couple opportunities throughout to have some questions as well. So as Malcolm mentioned, I've got 15 years experience in procurement, 14 of which were at SaskPower and a year with Mosaic. So I've been the majority of it in terms of public procurement, so really dealing with public funds and spending them that way. What I'm going to speak on today is both the importance of public procurement and what shaped Canadian tender laws, what SUMA is doing in terms of this municipal procurement program, and as well the newest partnership which was signed by the province back in 2010. So again, if you have questions along the way, go ahead, put your hand up, and we can take a break, and you can ask him at the microphone. So again, a little bit on the agenda, we're going to talk about, start off with some public procurement values and ethics, procurement law regulations and governance, contractual obligations, contract law in Canada. So I'm going to review a few case laws, very pertinent case laws to procurement law in Canada. And then we'll talk about tenders versus requests for proposals. And essentially, I'm talking about binding procurements versus non-binding procurements. And then the impact of negative public perception and how that looks, and the reality that you may be doing things well and doing things right, but when people view that you're doing things wrong, and how it ends up affecting you and your municipality. And then a little bit on the newest partnership trade agreement, and then finally an overview of the program itself and where we are to date. So I want to start off and talk a little bit about what we call the triple threat to public procurement. So we're looking at the legal side and legal risks, which I'll go over later on. Financial risks, which would include kind of putting all your eggs in one basket, not getting best value for your spend. And then reputational risks, as I touched on, in terms of the perception on how you're doing your business. As we know and we see often, media coverage brings a lot of this to light very frequently. And so you look at, over the years, the federal sponsorship scandal to things like smart meters in the province. The public in general takes a lot of ownership and really wants to be informed in terms of what's going on. And so you get into the whole idea of the reputation and how things are perceived along the way. I want to try and keep this somewhat interactive, and if anybody has any examples they want to share of things that happen in their community that could be perceived wrong even though they weren't. So if there are, feel free and put your hand up. But if not, I can give you an example of things that may not be perceived well even though they were done well. So say in your town or your city, you had a snow removal contract. The mayor's brother happens to have a grader. He's awarded that contract. And even though it was done openly, correctly, fairly, and done in a transparent manner, things can be viewed differently. And so that's where we come around the whole perception is reality idea. So something to just keep in mind around the reputation. So a little bit on the public procurement values. And so basically, again, as we see, spending public funds is really a sensitive issue. Everybody wants their say and they want to have an opportunity to have a piece of the pie, which makes sense. As you remember back again to the federal sponsorship scandal, you see that the stakeholders are very interested where their money is going. And one of the key pieces that SUMA will develop when we put together this program is going to be a strong mission and value statement, as well as the values of public procurement. And they will be in line with what general procurement values are around accountability, ethics, impartiality, professionalism, service, and transparency. So around the accountability is really about taking ownership and being responsible to the stakeholders, applying sound business judgment, maximizing competition where it makes sense to do so, and using very good procurement opportunities as they come available. Having a high level of ethics means acting and conducting business with honesty and integrity and maintaining consistency. Impartiality is being open, fair, and non-discriminatory in our practices, and making sure we treat suppliers fairly along the way. Professionalism is upholding the high standards of job performance and ethical behavior that the public expects us to have. And performing a high level of service is simply committing to assisting our stakeholders to maintain a high level of customer service. So we're working for you. We want to make sure that we get the goods and services that you need in a timely fashion, at the right quantity, at the right time, and at the right price. And then finally, showing transparency. And essentially what we're talking about here is having developed policies and procedures so that if anybody does question what you're doing, that you can turn to them and say, these are our policies, these are our procedures, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and we're consistent in using them. So these values, as I mentioned, are going to be important to SUMA and how we set the program up and how we move forward. So a little bit on procurement law and regulation, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this slide because it's a lot of information there. The main part is that there's the governance side and contractual obligation side. So when you're looking at procurement, there are a lot of things that come into play in terms of law. So you've got, as I mentioned, the trade agreement, New West Partnership. You've also got the agreement on internal trade, which is a federal agreement. And then coming soon is a Canada-EU trade agreement as well that's going to change things up a little bit. Then you may have statutes, regulations, and directives, and then your own internal governance on how things are done. And then on the contractual side, you've got binding and non-binding procurements, which we're going to go into in some detail, so you have an idea of the difference between the two, and you can try to decide for yourselves which area is better to look at. So starting on the governance side, as I mentioned, public sector organizations or entities that receive the majority of its funding from government must be conscious of this procurement regulatory framework. And so the questions that you have to look at is, does the organization have a funding agreement or an MOU with the government? Are there any internal procurement policies that it's obliged to follow? And then finally, the trade agreements that we talked about. So in this case, we've got, again, the New West trade agreement and the agreement on internal trade. And then on the contractual obligation side, you've got binding and non-binding procurements, which we'll go over. And then when you consider all these rules and regulations that seem to be in place, it really can be quite confusing. And so the hope here is that we can try and make this a little bit easier to understand, and that you understand the importance of it for your municipalities. So in terms of contractual obligations and binding procurements, a common question is, what is a binding procurement? What does that mean? And what's the effect on how I buy my goods and services for my municipality going to be? So really simply, a procurement process that is intended to create a binding contractual relationship between the procuring authority and each bidder that submits a compliant bid is known as Contract A. And there was a landmark case that we'll go over here shortly back in the early 80s, 1981, that really started Canada down this frame of having contracts from submitted bids and